Coming up on The World Today. China conducts what it calls necessary and just military drills in seas around 10 miles from Taiwan in response to U.S. Speaker Nancy Pelosi's controversial visit. And first grain ship to depart Ukraine since Russia invaded arrives Turkish waters, completes inspection en route Lebanon. Plus, death toll climbs in California's largest wildfire this season. And welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. U.S. Speaker Nancy Pelosi has left Taiwan after a brief but controversial visit. Mr. Pelosi, the most senior U.S. politician to visit in 25 years, departed after meeting leaders in the capital, Taipei. But her visit as part of the wider Asian tour has spread fury in Beijing after she ignored its warnings not to travel to the island. The Eastern Theater Command of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, PLA, continued with a series of joint military operations around the Taiwan island Wednesday morning. The military operations involved multiple types of advanced warplanes, such as early warning aircraft, fighters and bombers, which carried out tasks in multiple airspaces around the island, including early warning command interference, suppression, forward maneuvers of troops. According to a pilot of the Air Force of the PLA, Eastern Theater Command, he says, "My teammate and I flew our fighter and headed for the airspaces around the Taiwan island. We're ready for combat and able to fight at any time. And we have the strong resolve, determination, capability to safeguard the sovereignty and territorial integrity of our country." The naval force of the PLA Eastern Theater Command also conducted multi-subject and targeted drills in waters around the island, including joint containment and control sea assaults and land strikes as well. During the operations, they focused on organizing high-intensity approaches, advances in multiple directions from sea, air, and conducting full-time reconnaissance and early warning systems. Meanwhile, Taiwan is self-ruled, but China sees it as a breakaway province that will eventually unite with it. China's foreign ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying says China has not seen its military drills around Taiwan causing freedom of navigation issues. She told a press conference today that the relevant actions of the Chinese military are a deterrent to the separatist forces in Taiwan and justified. She said China has never seen any problems with the freedom of navigation in the waters, but that more attention should be paid to how U.S. warships and military aircraft have come so far right up to China's doorstep to show off their force.
The relevant actions of the Chinese military are a deterrent to the separatist forces in Taiwan and are justified. You mentioned the issue of navigation in the waters. We have never seen any problems with the freedom of navigation in the waters. I think you should pay more attention to how U.S. warships and military aircrafts have come so far right up to China's doorstep to show off their force. We all know that China has repeatedly made clear to the U.S. its solemn position that China firmly opposes Pelosi's visit to Taiwan through various channels and at all levels. But clearly the U.S. and separatist forces in Taiwan did not listen. In this case, the Chinese military can only have a dialogue with the U.S. and the separatist forces in Taiwan in a language they can understand.
Meanwhile, Russia has been monitoring Mrs. Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, but said that the level of tension provoked by her visit should not be underestimated. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that he was not in favor of using that word, but reiterated that the visit was a provocation, adding that no additional contacts between President Vladimir Putin and Chinese leader Xi Jinping were planned in light of the visit. He says Beijing knows that Russia supports the One China principle and supports the sovereignty of China and supports mature, balanced steps by China to maintain its and strengthen its sovereignty. He says that no additional contacts between the presidents of China and Russia. Mrs. Pelosi's visit to Taiwan would be more reassuring for residents in Taiwan, despite tensions rising between the U.S. and China over it. Well, that's the view of political scientist at the Australian National University, Win-Ting Soong. Soong says the ongoing military conflict in Ukraine has caused concerns among some Taiwanese people about their security.
It's really clear that while China has stood in the way of Taiwan participating and going to certain meetings, that they understand that they will not stand in the way of people coming to Taiwan. It's a show of friendship, of support, but also a source of learning about how we can work together better in collaboration. Over 4 decades ago, the Taiwan Relations Act was built in building a strong bond between our two countries, advancing our shared interests of governance, economy, and security.
Ms. Pelosi speaking there in her visit to Taiwan. But you might be wondering where the United Nations stands in the midst of this brewing row between China and the U.S. Spokesperson for the UN Secretary-General, Stéphane Dujarric, says the UN and governments of many countries have reiterated their support for the One China principle in response to Mrs. Pelosi's visit. He told a press conference that the UN's policy on the issue is being guided by the General Assembly resolutions on One China. After Russia, Iran, Syria, Palestine, Nicaragua have also made statements on supporting the One China principle.
I mean, the only thing I will say is that the policy of the United Nations on the issue of on this issue is that we are guided by General Assembly Resolution 2758 from 1971 on One China.
Let's bring in our foreign affairs, not ours, but he's a foreign affairs commentator, Calvin Dark. He joins me now from Washington. Calvin, it's great to see you. I've almost become used to calling you our foreign affairs commentator. Thanks again. Mrs. Pelosi, she's made the trip to Taiwan without approval from Washington. What has the White House said about the threats from China and the jeopardy this puts on the U.S.-China relations?
Well, I think the fact that she went when clearly President Biden would have preferred that she not just shows our system of democracy, that Congress is a separate branch of government from the executive branch and she can go where and when she wants. And I think that's good for democracy. And I think that once she decided to go and went, the White House did what it was supposed to do, and that is to support her, be it with defense, letting China know that escalations would be met with the appropriate response. Now, as far as what this means for U.S.-China relations, I don't think that it was that the White House didn't really agree with the visit. This probably wasn't the right timing for the White House, given what they're trying to accomplish with China. But I think for the long term, what Speaker Pelosi did, it was a good visit. It made very powerful statements that I think in the long term will prove worth it.
The United Nations says it supports the One China principle. But how is that being interpreted in their actions when they neither condemn nor commend the visit by Nancy Pelosi?
I think they are basically acknowledging the fact that whether they condemn or support it, nations are going to do what they want to do, particularly the United States. Let's keep in mind that Speaker Pelosi also reiterated that this does not affect the U.S. position with the One China policy. Now, what that looks like can be different, and I think that's what her visit showed. So I think the UN is basically just recognizing that there's little they can do if countries interpret differently what supporting the One China policy looks like.
So what do you make of China conducting military drills? Issues, so many headlines coming in saying it's issuing furious warnings to the U.S., and this is over Nancy Pelosi's visit. What do you make of, that sort of show of force?
Well, I think it demonstrates, one, that this, of course, is an important issue for China. It is an important issue for Xi Jinping, who's, going to try for unprecedented third term. But I also think it is a realization that the fact that the visit was able to take place and that these are just exercises that didn't put Speaker Pelosi or anybody with their delegation in danger, that China realizes the extent to which they can express their displeasure with the visit of Speaker Pelosi. So I think that this is going to probably happen over the next few days so that they can kind of reiterate their position on Taiwan. But in the long term, I don't think it will really make that much of a difference.
Could China replicate Russia's actions in Ukraine?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why I supported this visit by Speaker Pelosi, because if she hadn't made it, it basically gives a green light if China wanted to do something similar to what Putin is doing in Ukraine. Now, I'm not saying that this one visit by Speaker Pelosi is going to change the calculus of China, but I do think it puts them on notice that the U.S. would not just stand by if they decided to ratchet up the tension with Taiwan.
But in terms of Taiwan, essentially, are they doing a balancing act with this visit and what China is saying, and then how the U.S. is relating with them?
Yes, because this is the other factor in this, is that while the U.S. is pushing and then China is pushing back, and while the U.S. is making it known that they support democratization and not independence, but not a Chinese incursion in Taiwan, there's a limit because it all comes down to economics. So I think Taiwan is kind of threading that needle, that they realize they do have U.S. support, but if it did escalate, that support's going to be limited because the United States is always going to take its economic considerations in priority to Taiwan's goals. So I think that's why they're threading the needle and being quite careful.
And the Taiwanese president says Ms. Pelosi's visit shows that democracy stands together, and the U.S. has said that it stands by Taiwan. But would it also be willing to stand by militarily if and when China carries out any actions against Taiwan?
The statements about democracy standing together are aspirational, and I think that is important. But when we get down to, real politics, it will all depend on where else the U.S. is engaged, what this means economically. So I don't think that Taiwan can take Speaker Pelosi's visit to mean that the U.S. is ready to help defend them militarily if it comes to that.
So would you say that U.S.-China relationship has sort of nosedived right now after this visit?
I wouldn't say nosedived. I will say that, especially this week and in the short term, things are going to be very tense. But I think midterm and long term, this is just going to be part of the negotiations that the White House is trying to, have with China, not just economically, but of course their relations with Russia and with other Asia-Pacific countries. I do think that, of course, the Chinese aren't going to let Biden forget this, but I don't think that it's going to have drastic long-term effects on U.S.-China relations.
How do you think the rest of the world should view U.S. relations? I mean, Ms. Pelosi had a whole Asia trip planned out. What message do you think it sends out to other nations about United States supports and relations?
Well, I think that it's going to show that the U.S. is not going to stand by. Now, there's a caveat with that. It doesn't mean that the U.S. is going to go anywhere and everywhere with military and the full force of the U.S. government. But it does say that when certain people and parties are in power, and we have Democrats in the White House and in Congress, that there is support for fighting for democracy, fighting for human rights, fighting against authoritarianism. And if that can discourage authoritarian regimes from encroaching in areas, then I think it's good. But like I said, that U.S. support is limited.
I want to talk to you about, the Taiwanese people. We've heard reports that they're saying her visit would be more reassuring, but, some analysts have also said there are certain concerns, the Taiwanese people, about their security following that visit. How should they sort of view this? This is in light of, this visit and then the future.
Well, I do think that one of the things that we need to kind of pay attention to, one of the things that I'm going to be paying attention to, is now that Speaker Pelosi has left Taiwan, and we see that China is, doing the military exercises, and I'm sure there will be more escalations between China and Taiwan, is how will the U.S. respond? Because one of the things that we don't want to happen is for this very strong statement of the visit by Speaker Pelosi, supporting human rights and democracy and all of that, for us to move on. And then this makes more difficult life for the people of Taiwan. So it'll be interesting to see how the U.S. will respond in rhetoric and in actions in the weeks and months following what will be sure China's escalated actions towards Taiwan.
Are you surprised with Russia's comments? We've heard, is it Peskov, the spokesperson to the Russian president, saying that it's short of provocation, and then, of course, talking about their support for China.
Not at all, because, nothing exists in a vacuum, and everything is connected. And I think that Speaker Pelosi making this trip, making the very strong statement she made, indicates where the U.S. is trying to go. And, of course, in the background, people are thinking, what does this mean for Putin in Ukraine? And, also, Russia is being strategic. They're trying to strengthen their ties with China for the long term to combat the U.S. and Western powers. So it's absolutely no surprise of what Russia and Putin's spokespeople are saying.
Calvin Dark, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you.
We head to California now, where search teams have located 2 more bodies in an area scorched by a forest fire raging for a 5th day north of the state near the Oregon border, bringing to 4 the number of lives lost in the state's biggest blaze this year. The latest 2 victims were found Monday at separate homes along a highway that runs through the fire zone in the Calumet National Forest, about 300 miles north of San Francisco. The remains of 2 other people who were apparently trying to escape the fire last minute were discovered Sunday inside a burned-out car that ran off the driveway of another home along the same highway. Authorities say no further information would be released on any of the deaths until positive identification is made and the next of kin have been notified.
They have identified the remains of 4 individuals. Those are being sent to state forensics labs for testing so they can confirm the identity. We don't have that confirmation yet. It will take some time. And then once that's confirmed, we'll reach out to next of kin. As the fire gets under control, we're going to start gathering mutual aid search and rescue teams from throughout Northern California and Oregon to gather and go into the burned areas to conduct house by house, structure by structure search and rescue operations there.
Firefighters are also battling fires in Big Arm, Montana. On Monday, a firefighting plane was deployed to fight the raging wildfire. One tourist captured the moment the plane dumped tons of water over the Elmo 2 fire, with sky providing an eerie orange backdrop. Officials say the Elmo fire ignited last Friday has burnt 16,226 acres. 10% of the blaze has been contained as of Tuesday. Still ahead on The World Today. Relatives of Ukrainian prisoners of war question UN and Red Cross, demand answers as Russia's Supreme Court designates Ukraine's Azov regiment as terrorist group. Please stay with us. Welcome back. We begin with our coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The first grain ship to leave a Ukrainian port since the Russian invasion passed through the Bosphorus after an inspection today. The carrier Razoni left Odessa on the Black Sea early on Monday, carrying 26,526 tons of corn to Lebanon's Tripoli. It anchored at the entrance of the Bosphorus Strait yesterday night. The sailing was made possible after Ankara and the United Nations brokered a grain and fertilizer export agreement between Moscow and Kyiv last month, a rare diplomatic breakthrough in a drawn-out war of attrition. The ship entered the Bosphorus Strait following the completion of an inspection by Russian, Ukrainian, Turkish and UN personnel working at a joint coordination center in nearby Istanbul. Ukraine's infrastructure ministry has also confirmed completion of the inspection and said it had 17 more vessels loaded with agricultural products that were awaiting approval to set sail. The Razoni is expected to arrive in Tripoli in 4 or 5 days. And Ukraine has asked Lebanon's top prosecutor to reopen a probe into a ship Kyiv says was carrying stolen grain that remains docked in Lebanon pending a seizure order. Ukraine says the Syrian-flagged ship in the northern Lebanese port of Tripoli is carrying some 10,000 tons of flour and barley plundered by Russia following its February invasion. Ukraine's ambassador to Lebanon, Ihor Ostash, told a news conference that the embassy near Beirut that the request to investigate further was based on new evidence gathered by a Ukrainian judge and was handed over to Lebanon on Monday. The Lebanese prosecutor, Gassin Odatz, lifted the first seizure order at the Laodicea ship he had issued last week after finding no criminal offense committed. But he remains unable to sail until at least Thursday due to another order from a judge in Tripoli. Moscow has previously denied stealing grain. Russia's embassy in Lebanon said it had no information on the cargo. An official from the company that owns the cargo has also denied it was stolen and said the ship would sail to nearby Syria should it be allowed to leave.
As you know, General Prosecutor already closed the criminal case based on some research and investigation. But today we have much more documents, much more proofs, much more evidences, and we already sent to the Prosecutor General official request to renew this criminal case. It's very important to understand. It's Ukrainian cargo Razoni, which was loaded with 26,000 of corn, is going from Odessa to seaport of Tripoli in a legal way, non-stolen, original Ukrainian grains. And we will expect this Ukrainian grains maybe in 4 or 5 days.
And at the Romanian Black Sea port of Constanța, dockers have worked for months to ship out Ukrainian grain in addition to their usual loads from Romania and its landlocked neighbors. The grain, which is poured onto conveyor belts in Constanța terminals, makes the air smell sweet and covers workers seeking shade under the steel silos. The export route is one of the few left open to Ukraine, which before the conflict with Russia was one of the world's top grain suppliers. Exporters have shipped 1.46 million tons of Ukrainian grain through Constanța since Russia invaded the country in February and the war halted shipments from Ukraine's own Black Sea ports. The first grain-carrying ship to leave the Ukrainian port of Odessa since the war began was already, and many more are planned. But operators in Romania expect they will still have a part to play in transporting Ukrainian grain, as it will take time to fully implement that deal. And the Russian Defense Ministry has said that a depot of foreign arms near the city of Lviv in Ukraine has been destroyed in a missile strike. The depot in western Ukraine housed weapons supplied by Poland. However, it isn't clear what type of weapons were being carried in the depot. The Defense Ministry said in a statement that air-launched high-precision long-range missiles near the city of Radikiv in Lviv region destroyed a storage base with foreign-made weapons and ammunition delivered to Kyiv regime from Poland. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has blamed Moscow for delays in the return of a gas turbine vital for the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. European governments have accused Russia of reducing gas supplies on spurious pretexts in revenge for Western sanctions over the invasion of Ukraine. The turbine had been serviced in Canada but has since then stranded in Germany in an escalating energy standoff between the two countries. A senior manager at the Russian gas giant Gazprom said the delivery of the turbine to Germany after the maintenance work had been completed was not in line with the contract.
Was mir wichtig ist, ist klarzumachen, dass diese Turbine jederzeit.
What is important to me is to make clear that this turbine can be deployed at any time and it can be used. There is nothing standing in the way of its onward transport to Russia, except the Russian buyers have to indicate that they also want the turbine and provide the necessary information for the customs. All other approvals have been obtained. So there are no reasons why this delivery cannot take place. And to demonstrate that, to understand that, and to show that is one of the reasons why I am very grateful that I was able to look at this with my own eyes today, and also to be able to show everyone that there is nothing mystical going on. In a sense, it is clear and simple. The turbine is here. It can be delivered. Someone just has to say, I want it, and it will be there very quickly. And then, this doesn't stand in the way of further transportation of gas through the pipeline.
Transport des Gases durch die Pipeline nicht mehr entgegen.
But in response, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says Russia's Gazprom is awaiting documents that will allow the return of the serviced Nord Stream 1 gas turbine from Germany. Russia's cut gas supplies via the Nord Stream 1, a key route feeding Europe with Russian gas. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline has been finished but has not been put into use due to Russia's sending troops to Ukraine and subsequent wide-reaching sanctions.
Вот эта самая британская компания, дочка, не отключит дистанционно.
And Russia's Supreme Court has designated Ukraine's Azov regiment as a terrorist group. But the wife of Azov soldier imprisoned in Olenivka, Alina, says that the UN and the Red Cross refuse to fulfill their responsibilities. Alina hopes Russia's verdict won't affect the lives of Ukrainian prisoners of war, and that all of them will return home. Russia has regularly cited Azov in support of its assertion that Ukraine is controlled by fascists. Russian state propaganda has compared Azov fighters to World War II-era Nazis, whose defeat by the Soviet Union remains a core part of Russian national identity. Well, as the Russia-Ukraine war enters its 161st day, let's take a look at the main developments. VOA's Anna Chernikova joins me now from Kyiv. Hi, Anna. It's good to see you. What's Kyiv's reaction to the Azov regiment situation?
Good evening. Well, yesterday, as you already mentioned, Russian court announced Azov regiment as a terrorist organization. This decision is taking order straight away. So basically what it means is that according to the Ukrainian intelligence and to Azov regiment representatives as well, this would definitely create difficulties for the exchange of these soldiers who are the part of Azov. I just would like to remind that Azov is basically, so it's not a separate unit. It's a unit under one of the battalions of the National Guard of Ukraine. So it was reformed back in 2014 or 15, and at one point they became a part of the National Guard. So Ukrainian intelligence just highlight that they are not terrorists, but they are a part of the National Guard. This is what they basically said in response. Also, Azov regiment reacted to this allegations by Russian side, and they said that this decision was taken by Russia in order to basically hide their war crimes and hide the torture that they did to the soldiers in Olenivka. And basically they call the tragedy in Olenivka a terrorist act by Russia. What we know also from the Ukrainian intelligence, and this also was confirmed by the Institute for the Study of War, this tragedy looks pretty much like the explosion on the site. It was not a hit by the rocket or something. So basically, these allegations, well, could be seen in this particular way, that probably Russian side is well trying to create difficulties in terms of the exchange of the soldiers. At least this is the position of the Ukrainian side. So, and we will definitely see what's going to happen. But again, Ukraine consider all prisoners of war located in Olenivka as Ukrainian army soldiers. Some of them are from the Ukrainian armed forces, some of them are National Guards, but all this is basically Ukrainian army. And there are no separate units that took place in the fightings.
We'll continue to follow that development. Banana, the Razoni, the first grain-carrying ship to leave Ukrainian ports in wartime, safely anchored off Turkey's coast on Tuesday. This has to be good news in Ukraine. What's the reaction been?
It's definitely a very positive sign that finally 26 tons of grain has left Ukraine and now is on the way and soon will be reaching the destination. It's definitely a positive sign. We know from the Ukrainian officials that another 16 ships are waiting to get out from Odessa and to enter this safe green corridor. These ships are supposed to carry a lot more products and different kind of products. And basically, Ukraine is looking forward to actually renew the shipments from now on. Again, still a lot of people, including officials and those who particularly involved in these shipments, they still are very careful with any predictions because still it's no 100% assurance that this is gonna be safe and no provocations would be in place. But still, for the moment, we know that sometime soon these 16 ships will be also leaving the port of Odessa. At least Ukrainian side said that they are ready. So for sure, positive sign for the whole world, for Ukraine. Hopefully this would be not the first and last successful case. Hopefully the first and next ships would also be out and reaching their destinations.
Dana, safety is one thing. Another thing is that a number of people have hinted at the deal between Ukraine and Russia, and this is for the grain exports, that it may offer a way forward to a possible ceasefire in the 5-month conflict. On the part of the Ukrainians, is that a possibility? What are you hearing?
For Ukraine, it's definitely not a possibility. We hear that Russian side were trying to. Again, we cannot, independently verify this information. We can only get what information that we receive from the official sources. But according to those who were present at these negotiations before the agreement between Ukraine, UN, Turkey, and Russia, UN, Turkey was signed. So we have information that Russian side were trying to somehow add certain additional points, and we know that to the agreement, and we know that Ukrainian side did not accept anything that could be connected to any ceasefire or anything except of grain safety shipment. So for Ukraine, it's not an option, and the Ukrainian president was saying this before the agreement was signed. The agreements were signed, and and still continues to highlight this when he is asked this question. Ukraine continues certain counter-offensive actions in the area of Kherson region. So it doesn't seem that this agreement definitely for Ukraine is not going in line with any ceasefire.
To think that also we heard the former German Chancellor say that he's an ally of Putin, and he said that Moscow wants to negotiate a solution to the conflict. Let's talk about what we heard yesterday. Russia saying that the U.S. was directly involved in the conflict. Prior to this, they've always said it's involved via proxy in the proxy war with Russia. And it said this because the U.S. spies were approving and coordinating Ukrainian missile strikes on Russian forces. Has there been a response from the Ukrainian government?
Well, the Ukrainian government has previously confirmed that there is, there is basically coordination between the intelligences, but it was nothing about. It was nothing to talk in terms of giving orders. Orders are given by the Ukrainian general staff and Ukrainian army high officials. In terms of U.S. and other international partners' involvement, it's about supplies, help in this in the content of supplies, military supplies, intelligence cooperation. We know about that. And it's not a secret. It's public information that intelligence is not only U.S. intelligence, but other international partners' intelligence. They are all cooperating and helping. I mean, helping Ukraine, like sharing information, and Ukrainian intelligence doing the same. So it's not we don't have any confirmations of orders given by any other country or any other military officials rather than Ukrainian.
Finally, Anna, just before we let you go, on the front lines, what else is happening and where?
I should say that the situation is quite tough still, especially if we talk about Mykolaiv region, which is under constant fire and very intensive fire. And unfortunately today, another attack, a rocket attack by Russia was conducted, and a lot of civilians suffered in Mykolaiv, and actually they suffer every day, unfortunately. And I should say that Mykolaiv is probably one of the most shelled places for the moment in Ukraine. This also includes Donetsk region and Kharkiv region. Situation remains quite difficult there as well. However, we see, and also it was confirmed by President Zelensky himself, and also by international and Ukrainian intelligence and Institute for Study of War, that Russian forces are actually moving a lot of their troops from east, from Donbas area to Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. This in order to strengthen their position there. So basically they're getting ready for the defense, because Ukrainian army continues its counteroffensive actions in the area. So we will see again what's going to happen there. But for the moment, this is basically the main frontline hotspots that we can see.
Over live for us there from Kyiv. Thank you.
Thank you.
And as the world's largest soft drinks producers reduce their exposure to China, Chernogolovka boss Natalia Saknina says the company is hoping to win a 50% share of the $9 billion market. Ms. Saknina says Chernogolovka is more than doubling the size of its business this year and expects to reach 30% market share within 2 years, from around 8.5% at the end of 2021. The scramble to win market share highlights the unexpected boom for Russian businesses and entrepreneurs created by the mass exodus of Western firms due to sanctions and restrictions over Russia's actions in Ukraine. According to data provider Statista, revenue in Russia's non-alcoholic drinks market amounts to $8.8 billion. PepsiCo Incorporated suspended soda production sales in Russia in March, one of the many consumer brands to curtail operations after Russia sent troops into Ukraine. Coca-Cola Company also suspended operations in March. In June, it said bottler Coca-Cola HBC AG and its existing customers in Russia were depleting stock. Both companies' carbonated drinks remain available to buy in Russia, but for now, that is, but are expected to disappear over time, leaving an opportunity for local manufacturers to step in. Still to come on The World Today. Zoo animals try to stay cool during German heatwave. That's in a moment. Stay with us. Commanding General of the U.S. Army Pacific, Charles Flynn, has pledged in Indonesia to uphold a free and open Indo-Pacific after presiding over the opening ceremony of a joint military drill with a Southeast Asian nation. The drill, named Super Garuda Shield, is the biggest military training exercise ever hosted by the two countries. According to the Indonesian military, at least 5,000 troops from 14 countries, including Australia, Japan and South Korea, are participating. The military drills, which run from August 1 to 14, are taking place amidst heightened tensions in East Asia, with U.S. House Representative Speaker Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan despite furious objections from Beijing. Flynn declined to answer questions related to Pelosi's trip in a news conference following the opening ceremony.
Saya tegak om langsung satu lagi.
I think what's really important is just the illustration of teamwork represented by all the leaders here and countries and their soldiers and capabilities that they brought together here today to work together for a couple of weeks and learn from one another. So that's what's really important about what's going on here today and what's been going on for the last couple of months and what's going to continue to go on. With all of the technical and procedural aspects of this, it's just a really important expression of our teamwork and our interoperability and our unity, really, as a group of nations that seek to continue to have a free and open Indo-Pacific.
To other stories, Sri Lanka's president on Wednesday called for unity to overcome the country's crippling economic crisis in his first major address to Parliament since his inauguration. The island nation of 22 million people is facing its worst financial crisis since independence from Britain in 1948, with its foreign exchange reserves at record lows and the economy battered by the COVID-19 pandemic and a steep fall in government revenue. President Ranil Wickremesinghe said during his policy speech, "Only if we face this challenge together as one people, the country can free itself from these hardships and be safe from this danger." Discussions with the International Monetary Fund, IMF, for a 4-year program that could provide up to $3 billion would resume in August, Wickremesinghe told lawmakers. He also said that constitutional amendments were required to curtail presidential powers, indicating he would meet a key demand of protesters who forced out his predecessor, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Angered by persistent shortages of essentials, including fuel and medicines, and skyrocketing inflation of over 60% year-on-year, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets early July, forcing Rajapaksa to first flee the country and then quit office. With an interim budget likely to be presented within weeks, Wickremesinghe said his government was working on a long-term economic plan. And Pope Francis has said that he felt the pain of survivors of Canada's residential school system like slabs, and that the Catholic Church has to face up to its responsibility for institutions that abuse children and try to erase indigenous cultures. The Pope dedicated his talk at his weekly general audience to his trip last week to Canada, where he apologized several times for the Church's role in the government-sanctioned schools, which operated between 1870 and 1996. More than 150,000 indigenous children were separated from their families and brought to residential schools. Catholic religious orders ran most of the schools under successive Canadian government's policy of assimilation. Catholic religious orders ran most of the schools under the policy. Children were beaten for speaking native languages. Many were sexually abused in the system. Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission called cultural genocide. The pontiff met indigenous people throughout the trip, and on the last day, mostly elderly school survivors in the capital of the isolated Arctic territory of Nunavut told him their stories in a private meeting. During the trip, the Pope his apologies evoked strong emotions and praise as a first step in reconciliation, but some survivors said they fell short of expectations. Some of them were later heartened when the Pope, speaking to reporters on the plane taking him back to Rome, branded what happened at the schools as genocide. And back home, in a bid to curb the spread of HIV, a clinic in Dakar is offering a substitution maintenance therapy to people who are drug addicts. With the management of opioid dependence, citizens who replace illicit drug with medically prescribed ones can now get the orientation and health care they need.
To reduce the spread of HIV, a drop-in clinic in Dakar offers free opioid substitution to people who inject drugs. Sepiad is one of the first harm reduction centers in Senegal. It has 250 people enrolled in its opioid substitution therapy program. Founded in 2014, the center has cared for more than 1,000 people. Aside from syringe exchange, opioid substitution, and psychosocial support, Sepiad offers health care. The aim is to reduce the spread of HIV among people who inject drugs.
I am here to take my treatment, and I am a tailor.
More than three-quarters of patients are men, but Sepiad has been working hard to enroll more women who are more likely to live with HIV. Mariama Bakiam is a former drug user living on the streets for years. She's now a peer educator at Sepiad. She's worried about rising drug consumption among young people and dwindling funds.
I go out into the community and visit my peers to raise awareness about getting off drugs and reducing health risks. So I refer them to Sepiad, and they can, like me, stop drugs.
The center encourages patients to learn a trade. Drug use is a criminal offense in Senegal, but Sepiad has the government support in various international organizations like UNAIDS and the Global Fund.
Ultimately, ending AIDS would cost much less money than not ending AIDS. Importantly, the actions needed to end AIDS are also key for overcoming other pandemics.
According to a report by UNAIDS, globally, more than 1.5 million people became infected with HIV last year. The number of people on HIV treatment grew more slowly in 2021 than in over a decade. The gap in HIV treatment coverage between children and adults is increasing rather than narrowing.
Still on the continent, Zimbabweans are desperate for survival as the cost of living soars, piling pressure on a population already facing food shortages and high unemployment, stirring memories of economic chaos years ago under the late leader Robert Mugabe's near four-decade rule. Shepherd Chowe is among desperate citizens selling scrap metal for survival in a poor settlement about 15 kilometers west of Zimbabwe's capital, Harare.
It's 11 a.m. and Shepherd Chowi has arrived at a scrap yard where dozens of other metal pickers await to sell their wares. For 2 sacks, Chowi gets paid $6. Chowi has a cart filled with tins, iron rods and other metallic objects that he collected in Hopley, a poor settlement about 15 kilometers west of Zimbabwe's capital, Harare.
I start moving around the township at 8 a.m. when people are awake. My job entails asking people to sell their scrap metal or anything metallic they are not using anymore. We always negotiate the price before coming here to sell. I can take care of my family through the business. I get $40 per day or less. Although it is tough, I can provide for them. Scrap metal has given us hope.
Chowi is among Zimbabweans selling scrap metal for survival as the cost of living soars, piling pressure on a population already facing food shortages and high unemployment, stirring memories of economic chaos years ago under veteran leader Robert Mugabe's near 4-decade rule. Annual inflation, which hit 256.9% in July, has cast a shadow over President Emmerson Mnangagwa's bid to revitalize the economy. By selling scrap metal, Chowi can afford to pay rent, buy food, and pay school fees for his 2 daughters. Zimbabwe's steel industry has been struggling since the collapse of the Zimbabwe Iron and Steel Company more than a decade ago. However, in recent years, small steel producers working with scrapyard dealers are picking up the pieces.
These metal pickers help the steel industry which we supply. Sometimes they lack money to pay us, but the metal is always available. I've been supplying steel makers for years now.
Especially steelmakers.
The scrap metal trade is not illegal in Zimbabwe, but has raised concerns about vandalism of infrastructure, including that of state-owned National Railways of Zimbabwe, which has called for the trade to be regulated. Zimbabwe used to be one of the Southern Africa's biggest steel producers. A return to more reliable steel output and its potential associate economic benefits, as well as the creation of jobs in the industry, could provide a stability that may steady the rush for scrap metals. However, with an increasing number of people making their livelihood in scrap collection, the situation will also require careful management.
And finally on the program, we head out of Africa to Germany, where zoo animals are trying to stay cool during the heat wave. According to a vet at Frankfurt Zoo, Nicole Schwarte, at a seal exhibit, she shared the family got a newborn seal 5 days ago from seal Lily. She's from Rostock Zoo, arrived pregnant at the start of June, and the baby was born 5 days ago. It's not known if it's 100% a boy or a girl. They say chances are that 50-50. It's pointing towards being a boy. The seals love water, spending a lot of time in the water when it's hot, and they can dive deeper, which is also a bit cooler. Awnings were installed last year to keep out some of the heat, to reduce the sun exposure, UV radiation, so there will be less sun exposure. The animals are also showered with sprinklers that will ensure a cooling effect through the evaporation chill. Some time out for the animals in the heat. That's it on the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.